Welcome, everybody, and we are so glad you are joining us tonight as we talk about breaking the silence on suicide. I am Chris Cummings. I am a youth pastor who's been doing this for 15 years, and through all of my experience of walking with middle schoolers and high schoolers, we see a lot of young people struggling with this topic and feeling like they can't talk about it. So we felt it was really important to provide a place and resources to talk about this very topic and what we can do to help with prevention. And I'm joined by my good friend Chris, and he's going to share a little bit about who he is and why he is here.
I'm so happy to be here today. My name is Chris Lott. I also have been in youth ministry for over 15 years now, which is crazy. But I see and work with suicide prevention in a dual role. On one hand, I'm in ministry, but on the other hand, I'm a licensed therapist. And so I see it on the front lines in the church, but also in my office with my clients. And it's an everybody problem. It's not just a young adult problem or a kid problem or an adult problem. And so that's one of the main reasons why I'm happy to be here and to share with you today. So today is all about suicide prevention. This is not set up to be a suicide intervention. And so we want to go ahead and start and get information out throughout the night, but most importantly, two important numbers for you.
Yeah, so there's two numbers we want to make sure that if you are right now feeling like you're struggling with suicide, go ahead and call these numbers. You can come back to us later, but we want you to go ahead and call these numbers, one of these numbers. The first one is 1-800-273-8255. That is the National Suicide Hotline. Or if you don't feel comfortable talking and you rather to text, you can text 741-741 and have a conversation there as well. Both of those are numbers that we would recommend if you're feeling like that place right now. Go ahead and start that communication and come back to us later.
The other thing we want you to know is tonight we are talking about a hard subject, and it is an important subject to talk about. But I want to go ahead and say that suicide has affected many of us in different ways. And as we start tonight, it's important for us to realize that you are not responsible for what you didn't know. And survival guilt is a really hard thing to handle. But I just want to acknowledge, like, it's okay that you did not know this, and we're glad you're here, and we'll have these tools ready for the next time you may need it, if you ever do.
And what we want to do is just provide things to look for and what are your next steps. Because a lot of times when I'm talking to youth and parents and teachers, we're just hearing, I didn't know what to do. I didn't notice something, or I didn't know what the next step would be. So we hope that tonight that this resource can help you understand what those next things are. Because in youth ministry, I am constantly seeing a rise of conversation of suicide ideation, and even suicidal attempts. Just in our own community, we've seen a rise in that in the last few months. And maybe like we were hearing things like it's all social media, or it's all just like this and pressures and things. I think it's like all of those combined, along with the fact that we feel like there isn't a place to talk about it. So that's why we felt like this was so important to break the silence.
And that's why it's called Breaking the Silence. We get that name from a quote from Kevin Hines, who's a suicide attempt survivor. His quote is, "Most people considering suicide want someone to save them. And what we need is a culture in which no one is afraid to ask." And so that's our job tonight, is to learn how and when to ask that hard question.
And so what we wanted to do is I'm going to hand it off to Chris for a bit and just kind of talk us through what are some stats that we're seeing in the world, but also like what should we be noticing in our friends and our families and maybe even in ourselves.
Yeah, and I think it's important just to understand the scope of the problem. And again, this is an everyone problem. This is not just teenagers. It's not just young adults. It's all cultures. It's all ages. And basically, the stats are overwhelming. But some for you are, in the United States, the suicide rate is the highest it's ever been since the Great Depression. In 2018, we lost 48,344 Americans died by suicide. And just for a frame of reference, Chris, approximately 45,000 people died in car wrecks. So that's, again, just to show you how big of a problem this is. And just to further show you some more information, in 2018, there was an estimated 1.4 million suicide attempts. So again, that's just overwhelming. The national suicide rate is one death every 11 minutes. And we've seen a steady increase in 49 out of the 50 states. And Nevada is the only state where it did not increase, but there's no real correlation
It,
to
it,
why Nevada is the one. But 49 out of 50, the numbers have gone up.
man,
But when we're thinking about our young people, 1 out of 6 students nationwide, high schoolers, seriously contemplated suicide in the past year. In America, we lose 100 young people die by suicide every week. Suicide's the second leading cause of death for young people ages 10 through 24. And if you took all the suicides, there would be more suicides, more teen and young adult suicides than teens that die from cancer, heart disease, AIDS, lung diseases combined. So again, it's just the numbers are overwhelming, and again, that's why we're here tonight. And that's why we start tonight with just kind of the numbers, but we're going to end tonight on hope.
We want you to know that suicide is a permanent solution to a temporary problem. That even one death by suicide is too many. We want to break the silence on this conversation so that we can actually seek help for each other and bring hope to our world, remembering that you are not alone and that there is always hope. And so we wanted to just provide some helpful information as we continue our conversation tonight about what do we even look for in ourselves and in our friends. So like what are some of the warning signs that are helpful for us to notice? Like how do we do that and actually like know something might be wrong?
Yeah, I think it's very important to know the signs, and that's one of our jobs we're going to equip you tonight with 5 signs that you can look for in yourself, in your friends, and people that you care for. And so we're going to talk about someone who's making suicidal threats. We're going to talk about friends or family or people we're caring for that have had previous suicide attempts. We're going to talk about sudden changes in behavior. And we're going to talk a little bit about depression and how big a role that plays in suicide. And finally, we're going to talk about final arrangements. So those are the main warning signs that we're going to talk about tonight. So really the first one, suicidal threats. This is when someone is saying words like, I'd be better off dead, or I'm not going to be here tomorrow. I wish I could go to sleep and not wake up. And Chris, it's important to notice that this does not have to be, we don't have to be having this conversation physically. We could be doing this over the internet, over social media, over text message. And so we treat those virtual threats in the same way we would take if someone was sitting right next to you telling it.
So say a friend like fails a test and they're just like, oh my gosh, I could just go kill myself right now. Is that what we're talking about? Is that the same thing?
So throughout the night, you're going to hear me say, trust your gut. And so language is very important, and the words people use are what they are. Do they really mean that? Or are they just joking? Are they just stressed about the test? So we're going to talk about what do we do to figure out what that person really means. So that might be the appropriate time to kind of follow up or even educate your friend that we don't use that language on suicide, even though we're stressed. But really, you'll hear tonight, trust your gut and let that gut lead you to what you should do next. And don't be afraid to act next, to break the silence. The second warning sign we're going to talk about is someone who's had a previous attempt. And so anyone in your family or friends that you cared for, their chances are higher of making a second attempt or a third attempt if they've had a previous experience with it. And so in this area, this is where it's so important to know that what the warning signs are, and just to be always kind of have a plan for these people that you're with. And at youth group, when if I have a family or a child that's had experience, I'm watching them, always checking in with them weekly, and just kind of maintaining my relationship with them and reminding them that I'm always there for them. The next big warning sign we're going to talk about is sudden changes in behavior. And so this one is where the quiet person is now loud and won't be quiet. The loud person now doesn't talk or is very reserved. The person withdraws from activities that they love. So the football player quits the team, or the artist no longer draws. The gentle person becomes aggressive. The outgoing person doesn't talk. The A student is now failing and missing school. The kids that are at youth group every night no longer want to go. And so that's a big warning sign. And that's one of those things when you hear someone say that they're very passionate about something and they stop it, like that's maybe a warning sign to say, hey, it's maybe time for another question.
Because when we're seeing these things, sometimes life just that happens. But what I'm hearing from you is when that happens, check in on your people. Like ask the extra questions that maybe we've always been
Mm.
afraid to ask, beyond just like, everything okay? And then like not really listening. Like, hey, are you okay? And we're even going to talk about like, how do you ask that in the right way to know? But I think that's really helpful to, sometimes it's always like, well, they were really like this outgoing person and now they're a recluse. But like even the opposite can be true as well. Like if someone is spinning that 180 out of nowhere on anything in their life, that's something to pay attention
So
to.
that's one of the first steps. It's just being observant,
Yeah.
recognizing that when changes happen, and then asking what's going on. And so, and you may not immediately jump to the suicide question, but just being quizzical and trusting your gut. One of the biggest warning signs we're going to talk about is depression. Untreated depression is the #1 cause of suicide. I'm going to say that again. Untreated depression is the #1 cause of suicide. And so the goal here tonight is not to diagnose you with depression, but just for you to think about some of the 2 main causes that feed into depression also feed into suicide. And those are isolation and hopelessness. And so when tonight, what we're going to talk about is ways to kind of fight against isolation and ways to create hope. What does it mean to create hope for people? How and where and why do we even create hope? And so that's going to be part of our conversation tonight.
Yeah. I think that's really helpful because we're trying to think through beyond like, I had a bad day or I'm sad. There's like a deeper undertone that happens in depression that's like under all of it. Just like the test thing, it's not like you just had a moment, it's like kind of an ongoing thing. And that isolation I have noticed in all the situations as a youth pastor where I've helped respond and gotten help. Isolation was always part of that.
Yeah, and depression, again, it's okay to be sad and it's okay to have bad days. Depression's where it's ongoing for more than 2 weeks, and it's kind of like you said, like a cloud is over top of you. And so again, this is where we're not asking you to fix the depression or even figure out why, but this is just another warning sign to where it might be time to get more help. And finally, the last one we're going to talk about, warning signs, is making final arrangements. So this is someone giving away prized possessions, making the rounds and saying goodbye, asking someone to speak at their funeral or will they come to my funeral. These are things like there's a new trend of people giving their driver's license away to their best friend. If I'm not going to need this anymore, here's my driver's license. And so this, if they're writing letters or making any plans and talking about suicide, this is a major red flag, and we'd want to have some immediate intervention.
Yeah, I've definitely heard some of this where they're making arrangements, but there's also that like it doesn't matter anymore. So like the thing we talked about, that 180 of changing things, like the things that did matter don't, and nothing actually matters. And well, why should I even be here anymore? All of those type things lead to these final arrangements that you're talking about that I think have been real big trigger warning signs for people that I've heard.
Yeah, I think I love what you said, trigger warning signs, because that's what really this is. It's just you knowing the warning signs and you knowing when it's time to ask more. And so on your screen, you'll see a list of risk factors for suicide. And again, it's okay if someone may not be suicidal if there's one of the risk factors on the screen. But if you see them starting to stack up on top of each other and they have a previous history with suicide, they're saying goodbye and they're struggling at school and they've socially withdrawn themselves, like those are now 3 or 4 risk factors stacked on top of each other, and there may be more urgencies on when it's time to intervene and ask the question.
So almost like a Jenga tower, the higher you go, the more likely it is to topple. And so when we see a lot of those pieces stacked up, that's when we really need to be paying attention.
Yeah, and again, we all have bad days.
Right.
And again, I just say time and time again, you are on the front lines with your friends and your loved ones. I'm a trained therapist and can talk to someone about suicide, but I don't get to talk to them unless you ask the hard question and help get them more help. And so that's tonight. Again, don't be afraid to ask the question, and we're about to just get into how to ask that.
Yeah, definitely. So you've heard warning signs and what to notice, and we wanted to give you some practice on paying attention to a story. This is actually a real story by Kevin Hines in his book, Cracked Not Broken, from his suicide attempt. As you hear it, what do you notice? What are some of the warning signs? What are the things he needed that he didn't have, and situational things that may have brought him to this decision. So as you listen, pay attention to those things, and we'll actually give you time to discuss with those around you right afterwards.
In September 2000, Kevin Hines leapt off the Golden Gate Bridge, a method of suicide attempt that has resulted in death for most of the 2,000 people who have made the jump since the bridge was erected in 1937. He is one of only 36, less than 1%, to survive the fall. Listen to his words leading up to his jump. September 24th rolls around. 2000. I decide this is it. Tomorrow I'm going to end my life. I was ready to go. I was just gone. It was over. I knew what was going to happen. I'm going to go to the bridge. I'm going to jump. It's just that simple. That's it. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. It's done. I went out to the Golden Gate Bridge. On the bus, I began to cry softly in the back. The bus was packed. On the bus, I began thinking, if one person comes up to me and says, "Are you okay?" I'll turn around. If one person comes up to me and asks if anything's wrong, I'll tell them everything. I go out at the parking lot and thought, Kevin, turn around. Get on the bus again. Go back. Then I heard voices. You must die. You must die. So I walk onto the span. I must have been there 40 minutes. And once again, I thought, one person has to come up to me and say, "Are you okay?" One person, anybody. A woman was approaching me and I thought, oh, thank God. Thank you, God. She had sunglasses on and an accent. She came up to me and said, "Will you take my picture?" I took her picture 5 times. I said, nobody cares after she left. I turned around, backed up to the railing next to the roadway, ran, and catapulted myself over with my arms. The split second I hit free fall, I thought, oh my God, I don't want to die. What did I just do? I was wide awake. The voices were gone. I was right there facing ultimate death. Listening to that story, what do you hear that he was feeling? What did he need?
So I hope that that story was helpful for you, and I'm curious how your discussions went. But I was going to talk to Chris. What are some of the things we should have noticed in that story that would have been some of those red flags that we were talking about?
Yeah, it's such a powerful story, and my takeaway is he wasn't needing. I mean, he was showing warning signs, and so he was very emotional. He had made a plan to go to the bridge, but even more, like, what did he really need? He didn't need someone to come fix his problems. He just needed someone to listen and say, "Hey, are you? I see you, and are you okay?" And so I think he was feeling invisible. He was feeling unheard, and that no one cared. And so it's such a perfect example of, like, it doesn't take a therapist or a trained doctor to fix someone. It's an impulsive act when they're thinking about suicide, and we just need someone to be brave enough to say, "You don't seem okay," or "Are you okay?" And there's different ways you can ask that question, but it's such a powerful story.
Yeah, because that talks about that isolation, that he was feeling so isolated, and literally over and over, he's like, if there's just one person, and there wasn't.
And it could have been a stranger. I mean, it didn't even
Yeah.
have to be a loved one. It was, if he said, if one person will come and ask me if I'm okay, I'll go home,
Yeah.
or I'll tell them everything.
And it makes me think about, like, today we're always so busy rushing to the next thing, that how much do we notice people around us that we could actually help them in something like this? Even just like giving them a smile, but like really noticing what's going on around us. So I'm curious, like, what do we do? So maybe we notice some of these things,
Right.
What's next? Like you said, like, we don't necessarily have to like solve all the things. I am not a professional counselor.
Yeah.
You are. That's why you're here. So what do we do?
So from here, we've seen warning signs in action, our gut saying something's up. What do I do? And so the big things: ask early, ask directly, and ask often. So don't wait. We're going to talk about resources where you can take someone to, but the first step is asking the question. And ask directly. Are you thinking about suicide? Are you thinking about killing yourself? There's lots of ways you can ask the questions. And also the third point is ask others. Get others involved right away. This is so hard. And if you're in a place where you have to ask someone this question, kudos to you for doing it, but don't do it alone. So get more people involved. So ask early, ask directly, and ask often.
I think those are really helpful. And I've also noticed the don't do it alone part is really important, because all of us struggle to hold our own lives together. And when you add on everything else by yourself, that's just adding to that layer. So asking for help and figuring out who can come alongside you, I think, is really, really important.
Yeah, so one note is all the studies show is do not be afraid to ask. All the studies show that by asking, you're not going to give someone the idea of suicide. In fact, it's the opposite. By asking someone a really hard question, it says to that person, like, wow, you care enough for me to ask me a hard question. And if you can just get them talking and they know that you're a safe person that asked, them dumping their feelings, like that's healthy. We want to get it out.
Yeah.
And so don't be afraid. You're not going to give them the idea.
I think that's really helpful, because sometimes maybe that's why we don't talk about it, is we're like, well, if we talk about it, then we've given them the idea. And that's great to hear that that's not actually the case. It actually makes it less taboo and more open to actually ask for help. In fact, we've done several of these together, and I had a lady who came to one of our sessions after the fact, had a friend call her at like 2 a.m. out of the blue. And she was just like, I was just seeing how you're doing. And the friend who had been to the session was like, hang on, these are some of those pieces stacking up. And so she said, are you planning to hurt yourself? And he was like, no. And then she had heard, like, but then also ask, are you planning to kill yourself? Because those are not the same question.
Right.
And so she did. She said, well, are you planning to kill yourself? And the lady was like, well, I was thinking about, and kind of talked out some things. And so she was able to get help because she asked directly, immediately, and immediately asked for others to be a part of that. And so her friend's still alive because of that.
Wow. And that's such a hard thing to do, to be in that place. And so when you do ask the question, it's so important that you manage your emotions. Don't put your own reactions or your anxiety or your uncomfortableness on the person. Like, it's awesome that they feel like you're a safe person, and it's very intense, but understand that your reactions impact the at-risk person, your emotions, your attitudes, and your beliefs. And so what you need here the most is calm and compassionate. Those are needed and the hardest to maintain, honestly, in those moments. But really, listen more than you talk. Be calm, take deep breaths. Again, the fact that they're talking and they're telling you these hard feelings that they have, that is therapeutic. That is the first step. It's a beautiful place if they trust you enough where they would feel safe enough to talk to you.
And that's where the staying calm is part of that helps me stay calm, is remembering I am not having to fix all of this right now. I don't have to solve all of the things. I just need to be present.
Yeah.
And being present eliminates some of that isolation that they're feeling and reminds them that they are not alone.
Yeah, that's the biggest thing is, Kevin didn't need anyone to fix his problems on the bus or on the bridge. He didn't want to feel alone. And so by being a safe person for that initial dump where they're getting everything out and their emotions, like that's the powerful moment of I'm not alone. I have hope because someone's there for me. So those are doing those two things that we already talked about. And it's an amazing space to be in. It's powerful when you're there. But just remember, calm and compassion.
Yeah. So maybe what do we do after we've had that first conversation? What's next once we have that initial ask and learn more?
And so after the first conversation, it may not always be so direct as the story you illustrated. It may be you think something's up and you ask and you get nothing. I've had a couple stories in my ministry side of my life where I saw some pretty big changes with a youth, and I would check up on her and no, everything's fine. Everything's fine. And she would show a couple more something else that I was worried about, and I would ask again, like, are you sure everything's okay? And but I was just setting the table. So the first step after that conversation is don't give up. It may not be an immediate yes that something's up, and this is beyond just are you thinking about suicide, but just this is when that warning, when your gut's saying something's not right, and you're that initial check-in. Don't be afraid. Don't give up. Keep going. And so, but keep the invitations going too. So like, don't let them isolate. If you see someone starting to withdraw, be intentional about keeping the invites, but don't take the rejection personal. Like that's so hard with our friends, and we want to be connected, and it can be exhausting, So like, don't take it personally, but you have to keep trying.
Yeah, because you're trying to help someone, and maybe they're like pushing back, and if you get mad and you're like, "That's it, I'm not even gonna," then you're back in that isolation thing again. But remembering it's not about you, it's about offering them hope and community. That's so important.
Yeah, and the next big thing to do is in that moment when you do establish a confidentiality and they say, I'm going to tell you some stuff that I'm carrying, like you have to handle their trust with care. And so there's several ways I think on that. First, if they're putting something on you, and it's important that you acknowledge and respect the confidentiality, the trust. And so I'm not saying this is not something we're going to start gossiping about or posting on social media, but at the same time, confidentiality is huge, except when it's about suicide. And then you have to kind of break that. You have to break that, and you have to connect to more help. And so it's kind of double-sided. It's not about gossiping or let me tell you about what happened or what I know, but it's about connecting them to help.
Yeah, and that's when it's important to know who to go to as well. Like, do you have safe adults in your life that you can go to? Friend groups are fine, but adults are going to help you with that next level of help. So maybe you have a teacher or a coach or a pastor or a small group leader. Any of those adults that have walked with you in your life, or a neighbor that you're close to, can be that next level hope to move it beyond just you two in a conversation and really actually reach out and get somewhere.
Yeah, friends support friends so well, but get outside help.
Yeah.
Bring someone in, a youth minister, a teacher, anyone. I can't stress that enough. If you don't have someone on your list, like your youth minister, your teachers, your parents, your coaches, find someone. I'm sure they will listen. We've talked about this tough conversation, and really one of the biggest concerns I've seen with youth and with young adults, and just in suicide prevention in general, is how much should I help? There's danger about getting too overly connected to their pain and trying to carry it all for them. That's not what we want to create. And so helping a friend who's going through this or something, mental health issues, is very difficult, and it takes a lot out of you. So it's important that you know your limits. So know what you're trained to do. Like I said earlier, you guys are on the front line. It's your job to see the warning signs, ask the question, and connect them to help. So know your limits. But also, like, there's lots of feelings in here and emotions. It's mentally draining, and it can be exhausting, and it can take it out of you. And so it's important that you take care of yourself as well. And so self-care doesn't mean being a bad friend, but it means knowing your limits and not letting their mental health and their health level affect your mental health and health level.
And that's why asking for help, I think, is really important, and not just keeping it between the two of you.
Yeah.
Even myself, who's been in youth ministry for 15 years now, at least, I don't even know. It's a long time. And having a lot of these conversations, I feel comfortable having these conversations, but I also know I am not a professional counselor. I also know asking for more help only adds more help. That adding those extra levels of people is really, really important.
So yeah, be honest with what your level of expertise is. So that you said it so well. Like you do handle I know you do handle the conversations very well, but I know you have that conversation and you immediately connect to outside help. And so it's great to have those conversations. But it's also, like I just said, know your limit and know that this is exhausting and it's really hard. So just to, again, ask early, ask directly, ask others. Provide calm and compassion. Don't put your anxiety on the person who's sharing with you. Be calm, offer hope. Don't give up. Keep invitations going. Handle their trust with care and get outside help.
So I think all of those are really, really helpful, but I'm also assuming there are things we probably shouldn't do and say too, right?
Yeah.
So like, what are some of those things?
So these are another big things that we talk about in youth group and with my clients as well, is what not to say. And so, for example, you don't want to argue with a person who's talking about suicide or quote, call their bluff. That would, you want to avoid ultimatums and saying, think of what your mother would feel like if you did this, or I'm not going to be your friend if you hurt yourself. Like we don't want to be setting up any ultimatums or kind of pushing them to call their bluff. The next would be, we don't want to act shocked or lecture on the value of life or say that suicide's wrong. This is not the time for a theological discussion on your beliefs of suicide. Like that might come later, but in this moment when they're telling you what they're feeling, that it's an immediate shut off if you start lecturing them on life, because this person is hurting and they're just looking to share. They're not looking for a thesis on why life is important to you. The next would be, again, confidentiality. I mean, this one is such a hard one to do, especially with our teens. But I will say, even as a therapist, I'm ethically responsible to I break confidentiality for suicide. So if I have a client who tells me they're suicidal or they're thinking about hurting themselves or hurting someone else, I'm mandated to break my confidentiality and get help. And
Me
so,
too.
yeah, and we just want that to be everyone, and that's such a hard conversation, and we're going to have some discussion around that in a minute.
Yeah.
So the next couple things is the other big one is don't engage in activities that will likely make things worse for the person. So this is drugs and alcohol. They play a huge role in suicide's very impulsive. And if you don't have your full mental capability going on, or if you're affected under the influence of drugs or alcohol, we're not making a full decision. So avoid those risk-taking activities. And again, like you don't have to offer ways to fix them. Like Kevin on the bus, again, did not need someone to fix him. He just needed someone to listen. So you don't have to give advice. It's great they're sharing. That's the most important thing. And the next big one is don't blame yourself. You're not responsible for someone's depression or unhappiness. Now we can do our best to make someone happy, but we can't put their stuff on us. In the same way, don't go at it alone. So don't be a lone hero. Be a hero by doing what we were saying. Ask the question, be calm and compassionate, listen to them, and then connect them to help.
I think those are all really, really helpful. The one I want to go back to is confidentiality, because this is one I've seen a lot as a youth pastor of, I didn't want to break my friend's trust. My friend told me they were thinking about this, but maybe it wasn't a big deal, and they told me not to tell anybody, and I didn't want to break their trust because, like, they're my friend. So, like, how would we handle that? And I think it'd be interesting. Let's give them a few minutes to talk about it, and then we can come back and give them some thoughts around that. So how would you handle this situation? A friend has just told you they're thinking about killing themselves, but don't tell anybody. What do you do? Well, I hope that you had a good discussion. And like we said, that's a really hard thing to talk about, but we wanted you to think about it ahead of time before you found yourself in one of those situations. And for me, when I talk about it with teenagers and when I talk about it with friends, and I just kind of give them a perspective of it's better to have a friend who's mad at you for a time than a dead friend.
Mm.
And that's really what it comes down to is, am I more worried about them just being mad at me for a bit or literally losing a friend? And for me, that's a no-brainer.
And again, there might be initial madness, but the friend will know that they cared, that you cared enough for them, that you did something hard. And I also think it's helpful that you let your friend know, like your friend should know, if you're using that language, suicidal language, that you're going to take action, and it's not something that we joke about. I tell my youth, if your friends are using that language, to go get help and start doing the stuff that we're talking about right now. And it's made some friends mad, but you know what it does? It scares our youth to death when your friends are talking like that. So it's so important to stick to this and let them know, like, if you're talking, I'm going.
Yeah.
And so the other thing, parents, this is a great activity to help. I love the idea of role playing what your kids would say in these situations. And I think it's okay for you to always to set up your kids and let them know, like, I can be the bad guy. So you can say, my mom made me tell, or to take the responsibility off the teen and to say, well, to allow them to use you as the scapegoat in this situation.
I think that's really helpful. In fact, my parents did that growing up. They said, always use this as an excuse to help with a situation you feel uncomfortable about. So if I was being set up to do drugs or alcohol or whatever, blame my parents. But in this situation, my parents and I have talked about this, and I want to get you help, and so I'm going to tell someone.
And parents also recognize that we've asked them to ask a trusted adult, and if your teen is bringing to you something concerning suicide, that you need to help follow up and not just it doesn't stop with you. So again, like, know your expertise and follow through, connect to the next person. It might be calling Chris. Chris has numbers who to call next. Yep. And so you just keep going up, but the train shouldn't stop.
Exactly. And we've seen this happen where I've noticed something on social media and reached out to a teenager, and then we've worked on getting them professional counseling, or a friend has heard something, or family, or a parent noticed a note on a phone. All of these things are ways where people noticed a flag, did something about it, and people were actually able to get help that they needed. And so these things work. I've seen them work. That's why we're talking about them and sharing with you. One question I hear a lot, so I wanted to kind of end with this, is, so how do we talk about it? If we're talking about breaking the silence on suicide and really working on prevention, how do we talk about it? Because I've heard died by suicide, committed suicide, completed suicide, killed themselves. What's right? How do we do this?
So this is a big thing for me, and an education point that I always try to do whenever I lead one of these, is when we talk about suicide, and we want to talk about it in a neutral state. And so if we use the term someone committed suicide, those phrases are also normally committed as something that is a crime or associated with a crime or a sin. And so again, that neutral preferred language is died by suicide, or they took their own life. In the same way, people started using someone completed suicide, or it was a successful suicide or unsuccessful suicide. And again, completed sounds like that was the desired outcome. And that's what we don't want to make when we talk about suicide. That's not the desired outcome. We want to keep it neutral. So again, they took their own life, they ended their own life, they died by suicide. We want to avoid using language that glamorizes suicide. And this is stuff that you see in the newspaper a lot, or in news, that it was a suicide bid or a failed suicide. Again, they made an attempt, or it was a suicide attempt. It was just very neutral. And finally, like, when you start looking for how people use suicide out of context, you see it all the time. And, I grew up playing sports, and at the end of every practice, what'd you have to do?
You ran suicides.
And so I coached my kids' sports, and it's hard for me to break that pattern, but we run ladders now. We don't call them that. And so
we also did the drink of all the sodas, and they called it the suicide.
I don't know why that's called a suicide, but
a one of everything.
Yeah. And so, but just refrain from trying to use it out of context, and educate the people when they are using it about why we don't use this word out of context. So that's another important thing that I do with my youth and I do with my children. And so I encourage you guys to do the same. And at the same time, though, language is so important. And so back to our first question with a young person who said, if I fail this test, I'm going to kill myself.
Yep.
That's where the words, you got to follow up and see what that actually means. And so when you hear words that could have different meanings for me and you, I just start the system that we already talked about. Look for warning signs, ask the question, connect to help.
Yep. And I think if you've gotten anything out of it, it's that. To remember that there are steps that you can take when you pay attention and really notice. There are steps you can take to seek help, to move beyond yourself and connect to a broader community where we can truly give help. And we want to remind you through all of this that maybe you have been in those places or you are in one of those places right now. We want to let you know that there are people that care, that there are people around you, and that there is always hope. No matter what, even in the darkest of places, there is always hope. And sometimes we need someone to shine that hope on us because we can't see it. And sometimes you need to ask for help because you can't see it. So remember to reach out and ask for help, but also notice those people around you. We want to remind you other ways of hope is the National Suicide Prevention Hotline. Just a reminder, that number is 1-800-273-8255. You can call that anytime, 24/7, and there are professionals waiting there to help you. You can even text in at 741-741 and start a conversation there as well. If you find yourself in an emergency situation, always call 911. But these suicide prevention hotlines and text in line are there to help you have that conversation that maybe you're struggling to have.
It looks like within the next year, we'll have a new 3-digit number like 911 just for suicide.
That's awesome.
And finally, I'd like to close too with is hope is different for different people. So know the person that you are. Odds are, if you're asking the question, you know the person pretty well. And so what are those sources of hope? And it can be lots of different things for different people. It might be a faith background. It could be their friends, their family. What do they have to live for? Like, help them connect to what they have. Now, we want to avoid saying, don't think, what about your family? But there's difference. Like, that might be a helpful conversation as we go, or just in your groups, is to say, how do we provide hope to someone?
Yeah. No, I like that a lot. So as we leave today, maybe you can talk about that with those around you. What does hope look like? How do you shine hope in the dark places in our world, in your lives, in our community? How do we let people know that they are not alone? Because you are not alone. People are here that care. That's why we're doing this. That's why you have people around you and people you're texting. They're there for you. Ask for help. Remembering that you are not alone, but we are in this together. We can be representatives of hope. Now that you've watched this, that you've learned what to watch for and what to do, you can now shine hope in those dark places all around. We know that you guys are essentially first responders in your schools and in your jobs and anywhere else that you are. So you're those frontline people that are able to provide that hope and help people with those next steps. And we are so excited that there are more of you being a part of this and joining this community. In fact, we'd love to hear some of those stories of how that has been impactful in your life. How has somebody shown you hope? And how have you maybe been able to step in and provide hope for other people? So as we head out tonight, we are so grateful that you're able to join us. Remember, you are not alone. You matter. And we're in this together. So go knowing that there is always hope and the hope that you can share with others. Thank you for joining us. Peace.